something that is, wow. Okay, it is my pleasure to ask, you saw her just, oops, you didn't hear my email. This is Hadassah Halamish. You saw her in the film. Her mother is Minna. She will tell you all about her. Minna almost made it with her tonight, but it was too difficult. And Dory, you'll help her? Do you want the lights on or what? The lights will go off again. Okay, and she's going to give you the personal family story behind this incredible story. Okay. This little thing here. This little guy. Yeah, I got that today. Okay.
Good evening. The Holocaust, the Shoah, has followed me throughout my life. Followed me mostly in silence. My mother, who rebuilt her life here in Israel after the Shoah, tried not to speak of what she had gone through during the war. She decided to give me a happy life, a good life, a life lived without pain or sadness. It was a tough decision for her, and it was a tough decision for me as well. For despite the silence, the Shoah was a part of me. I am named of my maternal grandmother, Hadassah, who died of hunger in Lodz Ghetto. The Shoah is in my name. The Shoah went with me wherever I walked, but always in silence, without words. 7 years ago, I was contacted by Yad Vashem. Hadassah, we think we have found a diary written by Rivka Lifshitz. Rivka, my mother's cousin from the Lodz Ghetto. I knew Rivka's name. I knew she had been with my mother during the war, but that was all. I didn't know anything more. What did she look like? What did she like to do? Who was her family? What was her father's name? Her mother's, her brothers, and sisters? I knew nothing. You can imagine the excitement, the emotion, the sheer curiosity that gripped me when I heard about the diary. From the pages of the diary, from Rivka's own words, I would get to know this lost cousin. I would find out about her life during the war. And I would find out about my mother, all the untold story that my mother never spoke and that I never asked about. And who knows, maybe in those pages, those words, I would find out more about myself as well. Rivka was 14 years old, like my granddaughter, when she wrote the diary. We have the pages from October 1943 through April 1944. The diary was everything to her. It was her life in the cruel reality of the ghetto. It was her soul, the soul of a young girl just growing up. It was her longing for her loved ones, her dreams for the future. It was everything. When she arrived in Auschwitz in August 1944, the Nazis took away everything. Her clothes, her hair, her name, everything, including her diary. The diary was taken from her and stored with all the belongings of those who passed through the menacing gate of Auschwitz. From this moment, our story is actually divided between the story of the diary and the story of Rivka. The story of the diary you saw already in the short film, so I want to invite you to read these parts of this tremendous document with me as I share with you the emotion that we, her family, felt from the moment we got it in our hands. What did Rivka look like? I still had no idea. My mother was with her throughout the war. They shared the same harsh wooden bunk, but she never was able to tell me what Rivka looked like. What color of her hair? Straight or curly? Was she tall or short, thin or heavy? She never said. She did tell me that Rivka grew up in a Haredic family, leaders in Lodz. Her father, Yaakov Aaron, Hashem Yikom Damo, left his house about 1 week after the war broke out. The German caught him in the street and beat him without mercy. He died of his wounds after about a year. Miriam, Rivka's mother, died of starvation about 3 weeks before the big deportation, the Sperra, the brutal deportation of more than 15,000 Jews, children, ill, and the elderly in September 1942. My grandparents, Rav Yochanan and Hadassah Lifshitz, adopt the orphan Rivka and her sister Tzipora. Other aunt took Tamara and Avremik. But then my grandfather was taken to Chelmno, and my grandmother died of starvation, leaving their 3 daughters and Rivka and her sister orphaned, alone. 5 orphaned girls, living alone in a 3rd floor apartment on an old broken down building, crammed together in a tiny bare room, no real floor, only 3 beds for the 5 of them, a small table on which they ate their meager meals, no bathroom, just a pail in the corner. The closet was made of discard boxes holding their few bites of clothing. A dim bulb hung from the ceiling, giving a meager illumination to the grim scene, and giving Rivka enough light to write by. This small, dreary room was the setting for all the drama written in the Rivka's diary. I invite you to join me in reading selection from the diary. Let the dim bulb that Rivka wrote by cast light on those terrible days in the Lodz ghetto. Today, the Holocaust has become something far away, remote, inaccessible. Perhaps, as we read Rivka's diary, we will come closer to understanding the experience of those terrible days. We will share Rivka's emotion as she writes about the dilemmas she faced, her relationship with others, her love, her hopes, her dreams, and her faith. I've picked a selection that will introduce Rivka to us, that will give us a glimpse into the past, and give us as well thought and lesson for our own time. Wait. The first topic I've chosen is hunger, starvation, the lack of food that perhaps more than anything characterized the Holocaust. December 1944. Mrs. Marcus argued with me. She told there had never been hunger like this. Maybe that's true for her, but for us, for me, oh God, what we have already been through. When my mother was sick, I cooked 200 grams of potato to share between 4 of us. 200 grams of potato, 1 potato, to share between 4 of us. The potatoes went to mother. The 3 of us drank the water they were cooked in, and a teeny piece of potato just for the taste. Again, I'm writing about food. What's happened to me? When I think of food, I feel delight and disgust. 2 absolute opposites. What a contradiction. But they somehow do go together. But enough already, enough about food. The lack of food was one of the causes of tension and even crisis between people in the Lodz ghetto. The ghetto was closed, sealed, cut off, completely under control of the Germans. The lack of food also causes a crisis in the house of the 5 orphans. The worst incident happened when Rivka's sister, Tzipora, realized that a little jelly had disappeared. Then it was a bite of sugar. The next day, a portion of bread. Everybody blamed the other one. Rivka thought it was my mother, Mina. So, though she didn't name her directly, she wrote, discouraged. Oh God, if I can't trust even these people, who can I trust? Who? This is also the fault of the ghetto. A drop of jelly. Please, imagine it. Put it in your mouth. Roll it in your tongue. Do you feel the taste? How long does the taste remain in one mouth? How much does it help fill an empty, aching stomach in a cruel time of hunger? The diary illustrates the narrow line between life and death that was constant fact of the ghetto life. If you ate, you lived. If you didn't have food, you died. A stolen teaspoon of jelly, so small, so worthless, testifies to the desire for life and the inability to predict who would live and who would die. Do we have the right to judge them? Can you even begin to imagine what we would do in their place? When I think about the awful hunger that my mother experienced, perhaps I understand a little better the atmosphere in the home in which I grew up. As a child, I didn't understand why my mother made me eat even when I wasn't hungry. Why it was absolutely forbidden to throw away food. I didn't understand the sentence, eat, eat, so you won't be hungry. Until today, I am compelled to finish whatever on my plate. Until today, when I'm short, I buy out half the supermarket. Until today, I, second generation, know the fear of hunger. And my daughters too. It's going to the third generation too. After reading Rivka's diary, I've come better to understand how my mother feared losing me, as she had lost her own mother, Savta Hadassah, and her sister Hannah from starvation. My mother had sworn to herself that she would guard me, protect me, and above all, feed me. I feel I have to ask her forgiveness. I was a poor eater, oy oy oy. I made so many troubles. And now I understand how much pain that must have caused her. If she will be here, I will ask the forgiveness in front of you. The next topic I want to explore is family. April 5, 1944. When I remember that now I can't look at my father just as his photograph, but never again at my living father, I will never see him again. God, how awful this is. And now come the third Leila Seder without my father, the second without any man at all. Last year we had Hadassah, but today Esther. Oh, how tragic it is. If only Avrami were here, oh God, Davka on Pesach, on Seder night, to be left without a father. Oh, how I miss him. I miss them so much, and I feel guilty. Maybe if Avrami looked stronger, they wouldn't have taken him. He was such a good boy. He gave me his bread so many times. Is that why he looked weak? I am full of regret. I feel like crying. I even feel like howling. One of the tougher ways that Rivka dealt with the pain of her losses was through her feeling of guilt. Why didn't I do enough to prevent the tragedies? Did the tragedies happen because of me? Which brings us to the question of survivor guilt. They died, I didn't. This is a feeling that every survivor has faced, the pain of guilt. The fact was, Rivka and Zipporah joined a family already living in extreme poverty and in a teeny, crowded apartment, a family in distress, facing hunger and starvation. And now, here were two more mouths to feed from the teeny bites of food given sparingly. 5 orphans living in one room, no adults to guide them. Is it any wonder that there were moments of tension and suspicion between them? This was yet another tragedy brought upon them by the Nazis. Can you even begin to imagine the significance of the loss of the family, the root of all that is secure and stable? So many survivors consciously decided to build family at any cost. The security and the stability that family gives, the security and stability that was stolen from them, was more important than anything. The survivor often see in their rebuilt family the ultimate revenge against the Nazis. My mother would say, they thought they would destroy us, but we arose from the ashes and built new family. True hero. We have now more than that. I was the first blossom that bloomed from the ashes of my mother's family, a blossom rooted in the painful history of our people. And now my mother has a great grandchild. And I am Savta Rabba. We would ever dreamed of that? Really, we can't imagine it. The next topic I'd like to touch on is Rivka's incredible strengths in dealing with the hardest of hard times. Rivka's faith in Hashem is the main source of the strengths that she displayed. February 1944. Ha! I laughed at all the world. I am the pitiful Jew in the ghetto. I am the one who doesn't know what will be with me tomorrow. I laugh at all the world because I have a rod to lean on. The greatest, largest possible rod, my faith. I have faith, and that makes me stronger and richer and worth more than everyone. Hashem, I thank you so much. Rivka saw those who did lose their faith. She was thankful that hers stayed firm. In 12 February 1944, she wrote, "If I didn't have my faith, I, like so many others, would lose my desire to live. Patience. With Hashem's help, all will be well." Rivka's faith wasn't simply a matter of religion. In such a harsh reality, a person needs to hold on to something, some thought or feeling that will help him to deal with the chaos all around him, with the feeling of being cut off from normal life, with the knowledge that one is an orphan. But what helped her keep her hope, her dream in a better future? 29 March 44. The only thing that gives me a drop of strength is, as I mentioned before, the hope and faith that things won't be like this forever. I am young now. Perhaps one day something will come of me. Perhaps someday I'll be able to accomplish something. I have to have hope. And that's why I'm a Jew, so I can have faith and have hope. I hope that this hope stands on a strong, firm foundation. God, bring that better time quickly. It's amazing, no? The next issue, shall I share? Okay? Okay. The next issue I want to look at it is writing. To write. Simply to write. Then I can forget about food and all our trouble. I wish that Hashem would give Sarah is her mentor, health and happiness, because she gave me the amazing idea to write a diary. Occasionally, when I think about writing, I feel like I can't write a word. But when I start writing, I have so much to say, I almost don't know where to start. So Rivka wrote and wrote. She wrote her heart and soul in the miserable room by the light of a dim bulb. 120 pages of cramped handwriting. 120 pages of her thoughts, her feelings, her longing for those she had lost. Writing in a diary gave Rivka moments of comfort, a chance to express what was in her heart. That might be true of everyone who writes a diary, but how much more so for Rivka, writing under unendurable circumstances. Writing the journal allowed her to examine her set of values and her perspective, and to express her gratitude for her belief. She even dared to dream of writing as a vocation. Love. In addition to her faith, love was a source of Rivka's strength, one that helped her endure despite her anguish. In spite of her losses, she felt love. Perhaps even more remarkable, she was even able to feel, to give love. Here is in her own words. I mentioned in a letter that I was enveloped in a kind of emotion. I couldn't give it a name, but now I know for sure it's love. I feel kind of love, of affection, so strong it almost makes me want to cry. I want to surround the whole world, hug it, warm it up. I have a desire to do a lot for the world. Rivka loved the whole world. She was grateful for every flower that grew nearby, for good weather. It's almost frightening to read how much hope was within her as she wrote in the diary just a day before the deportation from the ghetto. Thank God for springtime, and thank God for my mood today. I don't want to write much about it. I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll write the single word, the most important word anyway: hope. When I read this selection, I was amazed. How did Rivka, just 14 years old, find a way to strengthen herself, her faith, her hope? How did she gain such strength from her writing? How could she even think of the future in a place of hopelessness and despair? The word hope, and the next day, deportation. As what happened to Rivka? She survived Auschwitz with my mother. They sent to concentration camp, and even she survived the death march. She was liberated on April 1945 in Bergen-Belsen. She was very ill, weak and close to death. The doctor said she will not survive. My mother assumed she died and left her behind, and didn't look for her till the diary came up to our life. But later, much later, 7 years ago, we found out it didn't happen that way. It seemed that somehow Rivka hung on to life for at least 5 months after the war's end. We learned that from a document signed by her in which she asked to make Aliyah and to be reunited with her surviving cousin. But she never made it. There is no record of Rivka reaching Israel, no documentation, no information. Her trail is lost. Her trail is lost, but her words have returned to us. When I think about the trail that her diary took from Lodz to Auschwitz, from Auschwitz to Russia, from Russia to San Francisco, from San Francisco to Israel, I have no doubt about Hashem Hashgacha. God's hands is clear. Rivka's diary was left behind in Auschwitz, but her words live on. Once Rivka's diary returned to us, we decided to spread her story throughout the world. We want to immortalize her strength, her faith during the darkest of the days. To share with the world the extraordinary personality of a young girl who kept dreaming on the future during the nightmare of her present. We hope to share the unquenchable love that we, her family, feel for her by sharing with you her story, and especially her own words. We love her so much, and from this moment, all of you, please read her words, think of her, and love her, and have a faith in her. Thank you very much. In the ghetto, the aunt,
You want to speak into the microphone? Did you all hear the question? No. Someone said, where did they find ink?
in the beginning of the ghetto, they have everything. In the beginning of the ghetto, they have everything.
But no food.
Huh?
No food.
No food, but ink they had. And my aunt Esther even go to search for her ink, and you can see when you look at the diary, you can see somehow there is other colors. Sometimes different colors. Sometimes it's a blue, sometimes it's a green, sometimes you can see. But in the end of the ghetto, it stopped the ink. So you can see the writing is going losing.
Where is the diary now?
In Yad Vashem.
It's in Yad Vashem.
In Yad Vashem.
Does your family have access to it?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. You can go to see it too. Everyone can go to see it. But we need to invite
The book is published? The translation?
Thank you for the question. The book is published last year here in the Michlalah in Hebrew.
And it's available afterwards for sale in the Hebrew one is available here for sale.
And
The English,
there is in English, but I don't know where you can buy
Where
it.
can you buy it? Is it
I think it's on Amazon, but I will check. If you'd like, I'll see if I can find the link and I'll send it to you.
No. It's
לא בחנויות.
No.
It was mentioned that the diary was found before in Auschwitz. Where was it found? I know that
No, it's a big problem. It's a big problem. As you saw in the film, the doctor that found it took a newspaper with a photograph with the oven, and she write, here I found it, but it can't be. It can't be. because it can't be. We think it was in Canada, where all the belongings to the people that came to Auschwitz, they took it to a big מחסנים, איך אומרים? Store. I think it was there.
Canada?
It was Canada.
Oh, not the country Canada.
Canada, in Auschwitz.
In Auschwitz, there was an area called the Canada, and that was a storeroom, so they think that's where it was. No, it wasn't the Canada.
And before she left her duty in Auschwitz, she took it. She tried to translate it, but she couldn't.
This was the doctor.
The doctor in
The
Russia.
doctor, she tried and to look, maybe she knows who write it, but she couldn't do it, so she left it. And then 70, he is 6 weeks. And my sister, she lives here in Beit Bagan, and she has 13 children and more than 40 grandchildren, but it's only the beginning.
I just want to add one thing that I mean, it was what a story and what a person. And yes, we do love Rivka. That's what Hadassah says. She wants us to love Rivka. And one of the things I loved is when she said in that very moving entry that she wants to accomplish something with her life. There wasn't much time given her. But look what she has accomplished. It took the years, and her voice, we call this hearing stilled voices. Her voice was stilled, but we're still hearing it, and we will go on. Thank you so much.
You have something on the computer?
Okay, how do we get rid of this back here? Oh, okay. Let there be light and let there be. Rabbi Hanoch Teller, he needs very little introduction. He is fresh from London and on your way to America, or fresh from America on your way to London. Do you even know? This is our, last year I asked Rabbi Teller, and we almost had him last year, and then APAC called, and I couldn't compete with APAC. We are very, very, very privileged to have a man who created a genre. I mean, I'm a literature teacher. Hanoch Teller stories. He created them, and he will share his wisdom and his stories with us tonight.
Very much. Chairperson Dr. Zitter, Rosh Michlalah, Dr. Rosenwasser, Rai Rabotai, cherished colleagues, notable students, ladies and gentlemen. I teach in Michlalah. I don't get to say that too often. I think you want to hear another speech like I want to be a ballerina dancer. So we'll telescopically condense.
Can you raise the microphone?
I can raise it. I teach you, I know where it's Dr. Rosenwasser began by saying Erev Tov, and everybody got verschreckt. I spoke this past week in South Carolina to 1,500 Christians about the Holocaust. And I began for 25 very long seconds speaking in Yiddish. And they freaked. But they recovered afterwards. Okay. Before I begin the plight of children, I'm really going to do this. Listen quickly. I think we're going too long. Before I begin to relate to children of the Holocaust, I want to relate my thoughts as a young boy regarding the Holocaust. I'm 27. And as a young boy, I was confronted by parents that were accented. Only the Yankee Doodles in the class had grandparents. And wherever we went, numbers on the flesh were ubiquitous. I wonder how many of my children have seen numbers, and if my grandchildren have seen any at all. In this regard, I want to relate 3 stories. Erev Yom Kippur is the most crowded day in the men mikvah. SRO, squeeze room only. And in my neighborhood, which is a pretty devout neighborhood, Erev Yom Kippur, the mikvah is so crowded and boisterous and noisy and ugh. And I cannot relate this delicately because in the mikveh there's no way to conceal because everything is revealed. And everyone is wishing Kajantov Kajor, very, very boisterous. And there's one kid from across the street from the Or Sameach Yeshiva for beginners. How do I know it's from Or Sameach? It said on his t-shirt, Or Sameach wrestler. I'm just joking. He had an earring and a ponytail here. He was clearly not a chassid nor Yerushalmi, and he felt legitimately very much out of place in this audience. And he placed his palms over his biceps, very apparent to me and everyone else that he had a tattoo that was not appropriate for Erev Yom Kippur. I dare say not appropriate for Gan Shor Freilach, but certainly not the eve of Yom Kippur. And the people in this mikveh were not especially subtle, about as subtle as heavy metal is subtle. And they're gawking and getting this poor kid who's highly embarrassed. He's about to step into the pool, and then he slips and trips and grabs the rail, and there's this roaring silence in the mikveh. Sphinx-like silence. Picture a forest after tree is felled. Imagine the Mudville Stadium after Mighty Casey struck out. And no one is moving. The kid dies 1,000 deaths as these lewd and gaudy tattoos are flying through the air. Nothing could have been less appropriate. In my life, I have never, ever witnessed such embarrassment. He turned alabaster. I saw him cogitating he'll jump in, and I'll never come out. And before it was so boisterous, and now it went silent. You get heartbeats. And then, this story happened 21 years ago. An elderly neighbor of mine walked across the moist marble floor. It was 21 years ago. I can still hear in my ears the thwack, 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 as he walked across the moist marble floor. Went over to this kid who's more dead than alive and said to him this heavily Yiddishy, European accent in English, "Don't tell him, come on. I also have a tattoo." Pointed numbers going up his flesh. In other words, you went to your Gehenna and I went to my Gehenna. Let's begin Yom Kippur together. Spontaneous, everyone over, wished them a good year. And a Shana Tova. I saw one small thing can make all the difference in the world. My next story is I have a friend. Well, actually, my friend has a friend. We share a friend. His name is Dr. Ike Hirschkopf. He's a psychiatrist in Manhattan. He wrote a book on depression titled Hello Darkness, My Old Friend. And Dr. Ike Hirschkopf grew up in Washington Heights. He was a neighbor in northern Manhattan in the 50s. And growing up in the Heights in the 50s, you saw a lot of numbers on the flesh. And in the summer they would vacation the Rockaways, and it was everywhere. So much so that when he was 9 years old, he said to his mother, when do I get my number? Which caused her to run out of the kitchen crying. Dr. Ike Hirschkopf's uncle is a physician in the Catskill Mountains, and his aunt, the doctor's wife, is his receptionist. And she called him and said, Ike, on Sunday, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is coming to the clinic. Would you like to meet him? What kid who grew up in the Heights in the 1950s wouldn't give the right arm to meet Rabbi Moshe? So he scrubs his face and puts on his yontif finery. He gets to the office really early. He's looking as religious as he can, waiting for Moshe to walk in. And it gets more and more and more full, and more people. And finally, Rabbi Moshe and his entourage come in, and he's starstruck. And his aunt goes right over to Rabbi Moshe and says, Rabbi Feinstein, I'm very sorry, but there's many people here. You're going to have to wait your turn. And she plants a kiss on his cheek. And Ike Hirschkopf melted through the floor. And he finally able to emerge. He crawled over in his halting, broken Yiddish. He said, my tante, sie weiß nicht davon. I'm so sorry, my aunt. She doesn't know. She's not religious. And I said, She has the numbers. She's holier than I. And the last story I want to recount, I heard in this very room. On Rav Cooperman's first yard site, Dr. Debbie Lifshitz spoke. She told one story after another, and she was hitting him out of the park. I mean, with such a subject, it's not so difficult. But the story that really resonated with me is, in the early years of Michlalah, a student applied from Petach Tikva, and she was rejected. And her father called up Rav Cooperman. She said, I'd like to speak with you. Cooperman said, I'd be happy to meet with you, but I'm not going to change my decision. Your daughter has not been accepted. But if you wish to come, you may come. It was a hot summer day. He came in short sleeves. And after a few minutes, he said that she may come to the Michlalah. And I'm not sure how this story goes at this point, but Dr. Lifshitz asked, what happened? He said, it was a hot summer day. He was wearing short sleeves, and I saw the numbers. I couldn't say no to this man. So I go from there. Are we still able to handle this?
No,
Honestly,
going.
true? Yeah?
Keep going.
Oh, sheesh. All right. Cruel, unusual punishment. Okay, aside from numbers, I wanted to know as a child, how did my father make it to America when so many millions were deprived of this opportunity, including my grandparents? That brought me to study the voyage of the doomed ship to St. Louis, which sailed in 1939 in May. 937 Jewish passengers. 736 had legitimate visas to go to America, but they'd only be valid in 3 months' time. The rest had kosher paperwork to go to Cuba. When the boat docked in Havana, it was tethered to the port. You could look up and see the passengers. At this point, the Cubans demanded a bribe. Now in Central America, Latin America, Spanish America, a bribe is a way of life. I'll bet you that one of the first words you learn in Spanish is el bribo. So if they want a bribe, what should you do? Let's try that again. Nearly 1,000 Jews on a boat, and they need a bribe. What should you do?
Bribe.
Right, give a bribe. How do they say in Staples? That was simple. Or something like that. But the leader of American Jewry, his name was?
Wise.
Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, whom we used to call Hagai Hagadol Hazeh. Rabbi Wise was the quintessential Reform rabbi. Good crop of hair, well-built, stage presence, oratorical abilities, cushy with FDR, Eleanor, members of the cabinet, a bribe. A bribe's against the law. And the irony was that had somehow they managed to make it into Cuba, and that required housing or education, they would have come up with the millions, but not to violate the law. And here's a hero whose name you may not know, James G. McDonald, who tired tired all the time, to try and grant a haven for Jews, appealed to the president, named after the highway in Manhattan. And by the way, if you would ask a Jew in the 30s who was a leader, they would respond in Yiddish, in the drei Welten. There's 3 worlds. The word for world in Yiddish is Welt. In the drei Welten. Der Welt, jener Welt, and the Roosevelt. This world, Olam Haba, and in the same breath, Roosevelt. So he appealed to Roosevelt, let in the boat. Because the captain of the ship, Gustav Schroeder, a German, was a benevolent, magnanimous humanitarian. And he figured, well, America is a humane country, and 736 have legitimate visas for America, albeit not yet valid. So he steams the ship up and down the eastern seaboard. How does America greet the boat? With a Coast Guard cutter to intercept. And had somehow they jumped off and swam the 20 miles to Miami, had this been doable, they would have been sent back. So McDonald is doing all he can, and appeals to FDR, let them in. That's rejected. He then comes up with another plan. They're in Cuba. The Virgin Islands is next door, it's right in the hood. It's an American territory. So FDR himself replies in response of Gordon Hull, the Secretary of State from Tennessee, a Southerner, no sympathy at all for a refugee. Some say at this point he was already senile. It's in the 70s. He gave the ultimate, the perfect, the quintessential catch-22. The only way they can come as refugees to American territory would be on a tourist visa. And to have a tourist visa, you must have a home to go back to. But these are German Jews. They were deprived of citizenship from the Nuremberg laws in 1935. So therefore, they can't come as tourists, as refugees to America. The State Department's visa division was headed by Breckinridge Long from Fort Worth, rabid anti-Semite. The short on long is that he would do everything possible to slam the door of America so no one can enter. One spin-off of State Department policy were the Musi negotiations. If you're not familiar, that means you don't read enough Teller books, but it's rectifiable. Jean-Marie Musi was the former Swiss president. He was a chum of Himmler, a sympathizer of the Nazis, but during the war his perspective changed. Towards the end of the war, the end of the fall of 1944, the Gedolim of America, the Vad Hatzalah, such as Rav Aaron Kotler, Rav Lezer Silram Kalmanovich, Rav Yasha Ber Soloveitchik, and important Balabatim like Irving Bunum, Mike Tress, Louis Septimus, Stephen S. Klein, working around the clock, undermanned, understaffed, underfinanced, to try and save Jews, want to save the 800,000 Jews still alive in the camps. They negotiate with the Sternbach family in Switzerland, negotiating with Musi, who deals with Himmler. Himmler is a very dangerous person. He's the top cop in Nazi Germany. And he negotiates because he's much more practical than Hitler. He wants to save his skin. The war is over, but not the war against the Jews. And since he's the top cop, he's afraid that when they liberate the camps, the guards in the camps are his acolytes. He wants them to have the status of POWs. He's afraid they'll murder them on the spot, kill them on the spot as war criminals. So he negotiates. And he demands medications and trucks, which the Vad Hatzalah cannot come up with. He then changes his demand to 5 million Swiss francs, about the equivalent of $1 million. Now, I'm aware of the fact that $1 million is not what it is today. But $1 million to save 800,000 lives? That's Borscht Billig. That would have been the greatest rescue effort in the history of history. But the Vad Hatzalah doesn't have $1 million. But the Joint Distribution Committee does have $1 million. So Rav Aaron Kotler travels to the Joint. Rav Aaron is the classic Lithuanian Rosh Hashiva. Gray, short, long black coat, svarim, stooped, maybe even a little dandruff. He does not converse in English, he speaks Yiddish. Irving Bunum, the head of Young Israel, is his translator. They go before the Joint and say, we need $1 million to save 800,000 lives. That should have been a rhetorical request. And the Joint says we can't do it. We can't do it because it means violating the British blockade, which was sacrosanct. And it means it's after Pearl Harbor. It means trading with the enemy. That's a crime. That's a felonious crime. Maybe it's even a treasonous crime. But to the Gedolim of America, it is despicable to violate American law. And it's odious to give money to the Germans. Yet far more important is Torah law, which means to save a life, pikuach nefesh, which means to save a captive, pidyon shvuyim, which means lo sam ol dam reyacha, not to stand by your brother's blood, which means our responsibility, one Jew towards his brother. And Rabban begs and pleads, he will not give in. Cajoles and wheedles, and finally if I say, okay, we'll give you the money provided you get a license from the American government, we can give $1 million to the Nazi enemy. Only one person in America will be authorized to give this money. And again, that was the president, named after Highway Manhattan. So Rav Aaron, with a raging fever, travels to Washington with Irving Bunum. And apparently the president felt that the plight of 800,000 Jews was not important enough for his time. He sends him to his hyper-assimilated Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau Jr. As you can imagine, being a secretary in FDR's cabinet, being an extremely assimilated Jew, which he was. Morgenthau Jr. celebrated Christmas and Easter. And Rav Aaron appeals to him. And he will not give in. And again he cajoles and wheedles. And finally in desperation he tells Bunum the translator, Bunum, tell him, you are worthless! And Washington is meaningless if you can't save the life of one child in Europe. There is no way in the world Irving Bunim is going to tell the Secretary of the Treasury in the White House, you are worthless and Washington is meaningless. So he gives him a milquetoast version. The rabbi's very disappointed. We hope in the future you can be of greater help. Now, Reb Aaron doesn't understand English, but as I like to joke, he was an observant Jew. He sees from Henry Morgenthau Jr.'s expression that what he had said had not been accurately translated. He said, Bunim, Zagam klar was a chok gesagt. Tell him precisely what I told you. At that point, Irving Bunim, not about to violate the dictates of the Gadol Hador, looks down at his shoes to see if his laces are tied, his socks are pulled up, and other matters of sartorial concern. He says in a barely audible tone, Mr. Secretary, the rabbis asked me to inform you that you are worthless. And Washington is meaningless if you can't save the life of one child in Europe. At that point, Henry Morgenthau Jr. collapses on the table like this for what appears to be an eternity. When he finally raises his head, his eyes are deltas of red, tears cascading down his cheeks. Tell the rabbi, I've not forgotten who I am. I'll put my neck on the chopping block to save my brethren. And Henry Morgenthau Jr. is a great hero. Ultimately, this plan was scuttled by American Jewry and Swiss Jewry, and Hitler himself intervened to make sure it wouldn't happen. But Morgenthau Jr. will go down in history as the one who was willing to risk his career on behalf of his brethren. And here's a very important take-home message. In life, we have to make difficult decisions. You make the convenient one, this is the way you'll be forgotten. You make the difficult one, that is the way you'll be remembered. An example which you're much more familiar with, Oskar Schindler was a man with a very checkered past. A womanizer, dishonest businessman, a boozer. He wrote the book on dysfunctional marriage. But that critical time saved nearly 1,200 Jews. And forever after, the name Schindler has become synonymous with heroism, bravery, courage, self-sacrifice, synonymous. Like Vaseline means petroleum jelly, and Kleenex means tissues, and Q-tips means cotton swabs, and Plastel means Band-Aid. Schindler means self-sacrifice. He changed his name. And we can too. Leopold Pfefferberg, I'm a senior docent in Yad Vashem. And when I give a tour in Yad Vashem, I point out Schindler's List, not the film, the list. Number 173 is Leopold Pfefferberg. He's one of Schindler's Yidden. And he was determined to make Schindler's tale known, because he was convinced that Schindler had saved his life. And after the war, he moved to America. Right after the war, Schindler needed money, gave him a check for $15,000. That was a lot of money in the 1940s. He came to America, adopted an American named Paul Page, opened a leather goods store in Beverly Hills, and whoever came into a shop, he tried to convince them to tell the story of Schindler. Now in LA, there's script writers, and producers, and directors. He could never get their attention. One day, an Australian novelist, Thomas Keneally, walked in innocently to buy a leather briefcase, and he couldn't get his credit card to work. Till he could get Sidney on the phone, it took half an hour. Spielberg unspooled and told him the story of Schindler. He was intrigued. He postponed his flight for one day, spent the night at Pfefferberg's house, resulting in him writing Schindler's List. Then Pfefferberg, through one of his customers, got the phone number of Steven Spielberg, famous film producer. And every week he called him up and hocked him a chinik. We got to make a film about Schindler. Spielberg had just finished producing E.T., in the middle of producing Jurassic Park. And Pfefferberg said to him, stop spieling with the dinosaurs. Stop playing with the dinosaurs. Make a film about Schindler, and I guarantee you an Oscar for Oscar. OSCAR for OSCAR. And as you know, Schindler's List won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. Nearly 8 decades later, after the Holocaust, the story of children is the only story left to be told first person. And if you don't have a psychological background, the story of children has to be the most insightful key into the human condition. So how do we tell this sordid tale? I believe, and I'm really trying to be quick because I feel free to. If I felt enough for you, I would stop. But. The story is similar like the story they tell about the Baal Shem. I was told that the Baal Shem was able to go to a particular spot in the forest, recite a specific formula, and an angel appeared. One generation later, they knew where that spot in the forest was, but they didn't know the formula. And yet a generation after that, they didn't know the specific spot, nor did know the formula. And we don't even know where the forest is. So what do we have, the grandeur and sublimity of the Baal Shem Tov? We have everything, because we know the story, and the story brings us back. I once told a group of elementary school children to try and explain to them what it was to me to lose 1.5 million children under the age of 12, go home and make 1.5 million X's. Maybe then you can relate to just the number. Because the crime is infinite, and the personal and familial tragedy incomprehensible. We have no other choice but to try and explain what happened in a medium that the brain can digest. So after the Anschluss, after Austria had a referendum and they voted to be under Nazi dominion, and then Austrian Jewry was subjected to the Nazis, and all these pictures and films and stills were sent to the West, America, particularly even the cabinet, were concerned about the plight of one Austrian Jew. His name was?
Sigmund Freud.
Correct. And the way the mind works, which is kind of funny to say about Freud, but the way the mind works, it's easy to think about 1 over 180,000. What's the most famous story of the Holocaust? Correct, Anne Frank. It's easy to think about Anne Frank over 6 million. It's easier to think of 6 million paper clips, clips over 6 million souls. That's the way the mind works. But the fact of the matter is that Anne Frank's diary is not a reflective story. She wasn't in the ghettos, wasn't in the camps, she had a roof over her head, a modicum of food, she was with her family. But because it's a story, it's easier to relate. And perhaps also, the very thought of relating to children being murdered is just a tad too difficult, too painful to think about mass executions. So she's been designated as the child representative of the Holocaust. I've read through many diaries and I'm trying to just connect to our theme of tonight. And they all share the children's resilience and their willingness to extend themselves on behalf of others. Despite the Nazi nightmare, they did all that they could to rise above their own terror and ease the suffering of those around them. Child after child tells how they tried to save the lives of others. And these diaries tell what it's like for a child to live every day knowing this could very well be the last day of their lives. Portray what it's like to live under constant Gestapo harassment, the grind of searching for the most basic necessities, the terror seeing friends and relatives sent to their deaths. The children were the smugglers, the snatchers, climbing over the walls or under the fences, and coming back with a scrap of carrot, a piece of potato which they had bartered for. And when they came back, what did they do with this little scrap of food for which they risked their lives? They would give it to a pregnant woman or an elderly rabbi. Those were the smugglers. And I'm going to read to you a very brief selection from the diary of 7-year-old Ephraim Steckler. By far not the most dramatic or horrifying, doesn't depict the Nazi atrocities. It's the story of a boy forced to live in a cupboard. Hideous solitary confinement. He was unable even to stand up. The Polish lady that housed him barely kept him alive, and certainly did not show him any compassion. His feet were twisted backwards. It took months of medical treatment before he was able to learn to walk at the age of 7. And here are his words, that of a 7-year-old. The Polish lady flogged me with her husband's belt, saying, "I'll drown you in the well this very day." She then feared that the Germans would find me and would kill her as well as me. She decided to break my heart, that she could tell the Germans that she had found me dead. But to my luck, she did not succeed, for I was a mere child and couldn't understand what death was, so I wasn't afraid of it. The children did not become the the mindless automatons that the Germans had devised all Jews to become. Instead of becoming irreparably damaged under such, we would imagine, under such conditions, they continued to thrive as youngsters. Dr. Yafa Eliach reports that in the Radin ghetto, children played with dolls made of rags, engaged in make-believe games surrounding burying the dead, smuggling food, instructing babies not to cry in the presence of Germans. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl wrote about his experiences in concentration camp and the others who tried to maintain their mental health. Their success was consequential to a spirit of resistance and focusing on servicing others. Those who survived psychologically intact had to believe that what they did on a daily basis could make the difference. So the children kept diaries, hoped that their testimony would live for them afterward. And as we saw tonight, the testimonies of humankind that this would never happen again. The diaries reveal the children's resilience and how they're willing to extend themselves for others. And reading through the diaries, then we realize that children at the end were less naive and trusting than they were in the beginning, but they still espoused the same values they started off with. Somehow, they learned to love and care even deeper for those with purpose in life. Let me try and share with you, after all it is Michlalah, a Dvar Torah of sorts. You go to the Children's Memorial in Yad Vashem. I'm sure most of you have seen it. Thanks to the genius of the architect, it is as black as dark can be. And there's a reflection of what appeared to be 1 million candles to commemorate the 1.5 million children who perished. And you hear a tape in Yiddish, Hebrew, and English of children's name who perished until you want to run out. And here's an insight from Rabbi Beryl Wein. The one name you don't hear is your own name. Now think about this all the time. Moshe Rabbeinu had many beautiful names. Avigdor, Tuvia, Yedidya, and yet he's always referred to as Moshe, Kimina Mayim Shisuhu. He was drawn forth from the river. He always had that visage before his eyes. He could have been alligator fodder at the bottom of the river. But his life was saved. If he was saved, if for no other reason, on behalf of others, to do something significant with his life. So that brings me to children's survivors. Because when the war was over, understandably, those that were saved and those that survived wanted to tell their story and how they had survived and how they've been betrayed. But those who didn't tell the story, and basically never have, were the children. They couldn't tell it then. It's almost gone untold. So this became my life's mission. And a good number of years ago, I decided to travel the world and gather the stories of children in a fight against time. Meeting children in groups of old age as they shared with me their stories, which resulted in our book, Heroic Children, which we worked on for 14 years. Finally, after 14 years, we made a very draconian deadline to meet and publish it. And we met the deadline, but we made one little mistake, which was not so insignificant. We're about to go to press, and we didn't yet have a cover. Now, a cover is a very important component of a book. I always say, those who say they don't judge a book by its cover, I know they never tried to sell a book. So we had to find a cover in no time. So I put my team on it. That means my kids. And going through archives, and we came across this picture. I don't know if you can see it from the distance. It's a picture that was shot the day that Auschwitz was liberated 75 years ago. And the picture is sepia, and it's a large picture. Many, many children. We zoomed in, and the copyright holder is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. Now, to use a picture for a cover, you need permission. So I sent them a request, and you have to sign an affidavit, you're not going to make any changes. And I wrote them like this change, and this change, and that change, and this change, and this change, and that change, and this change. And the next day they said, you can have it. But till the picture will be changed from low resolution to high resolution will take 3 weeks. 3 weeks? I don't think I had 3 days. But everyone knows, To turn a picture from high res to low res takes 10 seconds, not 3 weeks. But the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is a large bureaucracy, over 300 employees. So you'll pardon me for being an Israeli. I thought what was indicated here was protexia. And I have a friend in Baltimore who's a very powerful individual. They say that in his cell phone he has the private phone number of every senator and congressman. And I figured Baltimore, Washington, this is a shoo-in. I'm sure he was connected. And his son learned in yeshiva right next to my house. So I ran to yeshiva, here in Yerushalayim that is. I said, Aryeh, I think this is a rhetorical question. Aryeh, is your father connected to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington? And he said, no. Shrek and a half. Disenchanted, crestfallen, melancholy. I'm walking out the room, and he says, but my mother is on the board. I was going to wring his neck. His mother's a judge, Chaya Friedman. I sent her an email. I said, Judge, I need this picture. Here's the lot number, the specific number. I need it yesterday. The next morning, I have the picture. Wow. But then I thought, if you look at the picture, what I wanted to do, my methodology of touring, of guiding in Yad Vashem is always to highlight the individual. How can one relate? The way Yad Vashem was created by the curators was to be guided. And at any time there are dozens of tour guides, it fritzes my brain, unspooling data that the head cannot absorb. I'm always telling a story so we can better connect, a personal story. So I wanted to highlight one child. Now I figured this required a little permission because that's changing a picture. I was going to color the rest of the sepia, I was going to highlight the individual, which is my methodology. So once again I sent her, I said, Chaya, I need your help desperately. I got to get permission to color one child. And she writes back, she's convening a murder trial, and she has no time. I said, Chaya, this is killing me. And I prevailed upon her, and she writes me back, yay, yay, nay, nay. I made the request, I cannot assure you they're going to agree. And I'm thinking to myself, come on, this is the Holocaust. It's apple pie, it's mom, it's the flag. They're not going to say no. And that day, I'll use the technical term, that night, at 10 o'clock, we had a press queue in the largest press in Israel, arguably the largest press in the Middle East. 3 hours for press queue, or to be accurate, 2 hours and 48 minutes. I get an email from the head archivist of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and she writes, Dear Rabbi Teller, we regret to inform you, you may not use the picture. If you wish to use the picture in its pristine state without any alterations, you may. But once you make the slightest change, you don't have permission. And you want to highlight this boy. He recently spoke out. He's very sensitive, and our legal department said unequivocally, you may not use the picture. Shrek and a half. I got, the plates are burnt. They're on the drums. At 10 o'clock, I'm going to have 10,000 covers. But I'm not such a pushover, a bit of a fighter. I write her back, please send me his name and his phone number. I wish to speak with him. 1 hour and 36 minutes before press queue, she writes back, we don't know his name. We don't even know where he lives. I said, but you just told me that he sensitively spoke out. So 42 minutes before press queue, she sends me an online clipping of this picture. And on the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, those that were still alive from this picture went back to Auschwitz and pointed to themselves as youngsters in this picture. Of course, they were in the grips of old age. It was apparent, I'll use the yeshivish term, it was mashma from this article that the boy that I had highlighted, his name was Hirsch. I didn't know if that was the first or the last name. And if he was Hirsch, it said he was from Europe. I have now 31 minutes to find Hirsch in Europe. So Sherlock Teller is thinking, where would, if you look at the picture, the kid looks pretty good. So I knew he couldn't be a Pole. To look this good, you'd have to be Hungarian. Hungary was conquered March 1944. To be in this shape, you'd have to be Hungarian. So Sherlock Teller is thinking, where would a Hungarian survivor of Auschwitz live in Europe today? So right away discounted England and Russia, that's Eurasia. So I'm down to about 29 countries in 16 minutes. And then I concluded that it would have to be either Belgium or Switzerland. And I have a really good friend, Michlalah, who lives in Switzerland, who works for IBM. What a shidduch. So I called up Michlalah and said, Michlalah, I need you to find me Hirsch, who's an Auschwitz survivor in Switzerland. He said, would Hirsch be his first name or his last name? I said, I don't know. He said, is he frum? Is he a religious man? I said, I don't know. He said, Chanoch, what have you been drinking? I'm not drinking anything. I got 8 minutes. I got to find this guy Hirsch. You know what? I'm positive he's Hungarian. Look up Gabor or Tibor Hirsch. That's Hungarian for Mike or Steve. And I hear him clicking and he says, Gabor Hirsch, 89-year-old engineer, here's his phone number. I called him up, in my Deutsch. I reached him, I asked him for permission, he gave me permission. I fired off an email to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I said, I have permission. If you don't believe me, here's his phone number. It's already 9 o'clock in Switzerland. Maybe call tomorrow. I want you to know, it'll be more difficult for me to parallel park than to get his name on the first phone call. And I took that as an omen to tell the stories of the children. So sorry,
You won.
okay. So thank you very, very much. Yes, the books are, I have my book next door. I think you'll find it enriching. I know I will. And I have some other titles also. July 2 the third one's free. July 4 2 free. July 6 I think.
Thank you, and let us hear it for the amazing Michlalah. Thank you so much. Okay, oh, you're here. All right, so we really planned this evening. We worked very hard, Dini especially. Dini is here somewhere. Let's hear it for Dini, yeah. And every little detail, and their to-do lists, and their folders, and then all of a sudden, there's serendipity also. We get an email from Mr. David Ben Reuven, a professional songwriter and singer, who saw our ad and said, I have a song for you. And so in the last moment, we have added him to our agenda. It's a beautiful song. And I give you David Ben Reuven. He does one-man shows as well about Aliyah, about Zionism, about the Holocaust.
Holocaust, Aliyah, yes, and William, just William.
Okay, so we have this song, and then we have one more song, and then we'll have our evening will be done. Here, David Ben Reuven. Are you good with this?
Thank you very much. Okay, this song is part of my show called Beacons in the Dark, about the rescuers of the Holocaust. And it's one of my 6 one-man shows. And this song was written quite a few years ago when I visited the Children's Pavilion at Yad Vashem. And this moved me to write a song of tribute to the poor little children who didn't make it from the Holocaust. And the song is called All the Little Children. All the little children, all the little children, all the little children gone away. Little Jewish children, not allowed to live another day. All the little children, all the little children, all the little children gone away. Little Jewish children, not allowed to live another day. 1,000,000 little children, and 500,000 more, into the flames of Auschwitz, trebling kinds of evil. All those little children not allowed to grow. Decided to deny the right to life by the monsters of the right. All the little children, all the little children, all the little children gone away. Little Jewish children, not allowed to live another day. So now, children, take my hand and fly with me to the promised land. And there you will see little Jewish children like yourselves playing happily and playing happily in our land of Israel. All the little children, all the little children, all the little children gone away. Little Jewish children, not allowed to live another day. This is the story that I shall tell you about a miracle that befell. For out of the ashes of Auschwitz and the Holocaust of hell, there arose our state, the state of Israel. All the little children, stars up in the sky, all the little children gazing down from on high. All the little Jewish children, they will never die. Thank you very much. It's a big honor to be here at this wonderful and amazing and informative evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very well done.
I have no words.
Amazing.
I took
Thank you.
this on sight unseen after I heard that song. It's beautiful. To finish off our evening, and I want you to go out comforted. Zahava, Tohar? Oh, there they are.
Still here.
Okay, I said we did a lot of planning goes into this evening, and it goes back at least as far back as Parshat Vayechi. How do I know that? Because when I was listening to the Leining in Shul and thinking about this evening, and I saw Hamalach HaGoel, I thought that would be a lovely way to end the evening about the children. And then I spoke to Zahava and Tohar, and they said, we were thinking on Shabbos when we heard Parshat Vayechi that we should play Hamalach HaGoel. So as far as I know, the tune is not one that all the little children would have known, right? So it's, I think, a more contemporary tune than Up from Pripperchik. But we all know the famous story about Rav Herzog Zatzal, right after the war, that he went to the orphanages and he was able to identify the Jewish children by the words of Shema. And most of the younger children, probably, when we were talking about Kriyat Shema, Lamita, Krishma, right? And so some of them would have known the words, and the words should be words of comfort. It's a hard topic for children, but we're here in Israel, and we will remember them. Their voices were stilled, but not silenced. Okay? Zahava and Tohar. Okay, we'll need the lights down again.
Lights?
Who spoke about it? One second.
again for coming out on this rainy night to remember. Have a safe trip back. Gentlemen, we're going to have Myra in the corner here. Thank you again.
See you.